Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Insights, the podcast that focuses everything temperature-controlled logistics for the pharmaceutical industry. My name's Thomas Hunt, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Christophe Pierlot, who is CEO of Exam Packaging. Christophe, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, Thomas. Yeah, doing great. Thanks for the invite.
It's great to have you on. We met obviously at Pharma and we discussed this, so I'm really glad we could get a date in the diary. I think a really nice place to start is you've had a really interesting and varied career in some different sectors. So maybe if you can run us through your last few roles that you've done, and then obviously your current position at Exam Packaging and what you're doing there.
Okay, great. So basically I'm a bioprocess engineer. So the first 12 years of my career, I've been focusing in making medicines purely on the technology aspect. So let's say the culture, the purification and the final formulation filling activities. And I had 6 different roles in the company. Paul Biotech / Cytiva, GE Healthcare nowadays. And basically, from product specialist, from product manager roles, and from also, let's say, some sales director roles. So that's a bit my career before Exam. And then Exam, I joined indeed in September 2024. And I guess we will be talking about that.
It's an interesting journey you've had into packaging. And as you say, you went from bioprocess engineer at Paul and at Cytiva to running a cold chain packaging company. And I was quite interested to understand what prompted that switch and what really excited you about getting into the world of packaging per se.
Yeah, well, clearly first at university, I would say I was too impatient to be staying in the lab, right? So I have many friends, of course, who are taking that route in discovering new scientific breakthroughs, which is really great. But I would say, I went to Paul Biotech and then Cytiva, mostly in a new business unit where we had to start from scratch. It was called ready-to-use bioprocessing consumable industry, which basically was a way to make medicines faster and cheaper, and which is today the predominant way of making, medicines. But then indeed I switched to Exam Packaging. I would say, overall the common thing in that is, I'd say the curiosity to see a different piece of the value chain, but also the desire to continue in more of a entrepreneurial way. As business scale, I'm kind of getting a personal satisfaction and I can move on to the next one. So this is a bit what happened. And I must say, I enjoyed mostly my role as product management in the past, where I had the opportunity to work with early innovators, startups, and helping them to bring their game-changing technologies to market. And this is something I somewhat recognize also in Exam, seeing quite a lot of untapped innovation potential. And I thought, okay, this is a great moment to do it and to try and accelerate the business through differentiation.
Yeah, okay. And Exam Packaging, I was quite interested to read, has been around since 1986, which I wasn't quite aware of. And coming in from a manufacturing background, when you arrived, what did you find that maybe needed improving, or where do you see the gaps? And what was working really well at Exam when you first joined a year and a bit ago?
Yeah, so the history of the company is that the first 15 years, it was more into isothermal packaging, but for the food and beverage sector. And as from the 2000s, they really went into pharmaceutical cold chain, right? And I would say, as I stepped in, I would say unexpectedly, really, there was really a good customer satisfaction on delivery performance and some scalable operations, including automation, and also like a good sub-supply network with, local sourcing initiatives and scalability in partnerships with local sheltered workplace. So my focus really has been purely on valorization, innovation, and internationalization.
Yeah. Okay. So the infrastructure and the sort of the processes internally were quite well set, I presume, within the business. And you've come in really looking at innovation, developing the packaging side of the business.
Absolutely.
As your primary aim. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So on the innovation story, monoblock polyurethane technology claims 30% better thermal efficiency than traditional sort of panel-based packaging. And why does that construction method matter so much? And can you talk me through what actually is in that technology and why it's so special?
Yeah, I would say the difference is clearly marked the colder you go. The colder you go, the higher the thermal challenges to protect healthcare product. And in those circumstances, the performance of, let's say, a single molded packaging container with a single door seal only stands out. So a single molded solution basically minimizes the heat bridges, And this maximizes the thermal performance. Now, that is quite important whenever you go to the minus 80s or the minus 20. There you really see the differences of 10 to 50% depending on what temperature you talk. And beyond thermal efficiency, we could also say that this single molded structure and the strength it brings can also be interesting in terms of increasing supply density through stackability, which is, especially on pallet shippers, not really a common feature in the market.
Yeah. So this is a single piece pallet shipper with one opening. Is that that's the construction?
Yeah.
And in terms of the warm bridge element, is that where most of the efficiencies are lost in your experience on a pallet shipper? Is it the warm bridge where you've really mitigated that with a single-use system?
Yeah, we did the parallel testing because in our portfolio we also have panel-based, right, which brings other benefits in terms of flat pack and all of that. But clearly, whenever you look at dry ice applications, we have the thermal mapping and we clearly see, let's say, the gas getting out of many little corners and heat bridges in case of that. And so that legacy of monoblock structure is clearly recognized for ultra cold applications.
Yeah. And how unique is the monoblock structure in terms of pallet shippers in the market today? How unique is this to exam in terms of what you've developed so far?
Yeah, so I would say on the scale of pallet box like 785 liter, 350 liter, and 1200 liter external dimension volume, it is the only one that is available in that scale. So I would say for pallet shippers, it's unique, and this is where we focus as well with that, right? Because think about global shipments from a drug substance producing site to a drug product producing site. Generally, that is the active molecule, which needs ultra cold protection, and that is perfectly fitted then for this technology. So in that sense, it's quite unique, and it actually offers that 30 to 50% advantage to keep those low temperatures. We also actually, on a new innovation, and that is a patented technology, combine monoblock with advanced insulation, but we may talk a bit about that later.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I think it's interesting because our business has come out of construction and we're very au fait with buildings, and a cold bridge in a building, especially in a roof, is really a weak spot in any insulation and thermal value. And I think bringing that sort of knowledge and technology, because we're using polyurethane in boxes, obviously you're doing the same, but the warm or cold bridge, whichever way, I think maybe isn't factored in as much by the technical department, engineering departments as it should be. It's a huge weak spot in any structure where you're looking to maintain heat or cold. And I think obviously you're picking up on that with the systems that you've developed.
That's interesting, Thomas, because as we go along this podcast, I know we will be touching on some cross-industry like parallels, and it's really a learning point. So it's really great to have that experience to bring as well here.
Yeah. Most pharma packaging is still single use, I think, and I know people are trying to rapidly get away from it or do where they can in terms of reusability. In terms of compliance and validation, everyone's obsessed by that as a sort of topic. Is reusable packaging realistic at scales, do you think? And how realistic do you think it is long term on certain lanes?
So my short answer here is it depends. I see two main points which make it feasible or not. First being the geographical scale you look at. Are you looking at a national level, a regional level, or a global level? Second point would be the trade lane dynamics. And the combination of those two, geography and trade lane dynamics, will define if it is feasible and are meaningful to do reuse. I think we have particularly focused on an unsolved, let's say, a challenge is that there's actually increased complexity. The most complex scenario, I think, is the largest geographical scope. Especially think about the vaccine producer shipping to 165 countries in the world, right? And on top of that, those lanes typically are unbalanced, right? So what we see when we look at the global trade lanes for medicinal product is that basically Europe is a big export area with far less imports, and the opposite is true for the United States and many other countries. And in observing that, this actually of course sparks a need for innovation, because we actually came to that with a first responsible one-way solution as an alternative to either single use, which is predominant as you mentioned, or reverse logistics. And that solution focused on eco-design and with cross-industry valorization potential, basically linking healthcare, logistics, and construction sector, right? So here we come, Thomas, to your past experience as well. And the idea here is that if we design this from the start, we can think about an eco-design circular model which actually reduces weight, reduces carbon, and have a social impact at destination. because the medicine is good to have everywhere, of course, but then there's the idea, well, you do not want to leave a big piece of waste to those people, especially as you alluded to, mostly the construction materials of our shippers, where they are actually the same as in the construction industry. So this circular approach brings actually a solution to give 30 years of life to those materials that we use in pharma logistics to bring it from A to B. Plus, it adds actually an application, home application, which we partner particularly with caritative organizations like Habitat for Humanity. And okay, this is actually a way here to bring value to the change, to the chain without really adding costs, and could be interesting for, let's say, freight forwarders to find extra carbon offset possibilities. And we just give material a longer life cycle than the single use you mentioned or the reverse logistics. Now, whenever it's sound to do so, that concept can, of course, also be reused at global scale whenever you have a, balanced highway route.
That's interesting. So is Exam Packaging doing that at the moment? Are you effectively saying that Exam Packaging is producing pallet shippers and then repurposing them at the destination for other industries like construction, or selling them on? Is that the process you're proposing?
It is ongoing. We are doing, as we speak, actually tests in Romania with the construction industry. Mm-hmm. And of course, they need a lot of stuff. So they need all of the certificates of the materials we use. And basically, the idea is to pass them on. And so they can, of course, towards their own construction work, be certified and claim that it's actually, the same material as performant with, CE certifications or whatever. Yeah.
Mm. I see. Very interesting. I presume that the pallet shipper part of that is you have the biggest panels in there of insulation to reuse, and that's probably the most reusable. And then you've obviously got the outer that can be recycled. So there's probably a huge amount there that can be. And does that involve partnerships with, for example, the construction industry to bring that into a sort of holistic, full life cycle process? Do you think that's one of the hardest challenges in terms of bringing that in?
It was, and this is a conversation I started 1 year ago with, in this case, the Belgian construction industry. We are now listed on their circular map and website, but there has been great initiatives, for example, in Europe, but actually also in the US, there's huge maps of, circularity and reuse in general in the building sector is phenomenal. They know they have a huge carbon footprint. They are representing 37% of the global emissions. We do 4% with our healthcare logistics. Combining both is actually a strong story. And especially for those destinations we reach with our medicine, who may not afford to buy those expensive material, it's also really a good way to enable them and those societies to have some interesting elements out of those shippings.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think for the people who are listening to this, who are in the pharma sector, it's important probably to understand that what Christophe is talking about is some of the products in pallet shippers, for example, polyurethane board is the number one insulation board that's cut to size for buildings in the UK. So when you're insulating a roof or a wall, you cut polyurethane board pretty much exactly the same specification as the pallet shippers are using, and you use them in houses, and they'll go into the house for the duration of its life, but typically 30 years minimum. So and the price of polyurethane probably in the last 18 months has gone up 20%, 25%. I know over the last few months it's had serious increases as well. So I think that maybe the construction industry would welcome this, because obviously it's getting good product into the home ownership, which is being reused, and obviously probably a better commercial rate. And obviously on the carbon emissions and the sustainability piece, it's perfect. So it's very interesting. And I presume no one else is looking at this at the moment. Christophe, I haven't heard anyone else talking like this before.
No, actually we have been the first with that, and we have been registered in the Pharma.io Sustainable Packaging Guide for that reason of, the first eco-design which looks beyond our own industry, right? And that's maybe the perspective I brought, and that you probably also bring, with as an outsider, because I was in the healthcare bioprocessing world, but when I looked at the healthcare logistics, to some extent I was a bit disappointed into, and we come back to that later, what are the mitigations or solutions we bring versus the issue, right, of single-use packaging all around. And so this was another way, and I think we need many ways, and in the end, based on your lane, based on your destination, you will choose, the most appropriate way. But the toolbox, I think, had to be completed.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay. You've said the rise of biopharma is creating serious waste and carbon problems, or you've been quoted saying that before. What's the industry not doing that it should be, and where are the gaps?
I mean, the rising biopharmaceutical drugs is one of very sensitive, complex molecules requiring a lot of hypercare from production to delivery. So it yields the promise to the patients. And this technology shift is actually combined with intensified pressure for broader global drug access plans around the globe to all countries. And this, of course, complexifies the healthcare industry challenge to reach net zero ambitions by 25. So the molecule gets complexer and there needs to be a broader global coverage. Now, according to MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics 2023 study, we see that with the current rate of solutions we have in our toolbox, pharma companies will only reach 25 to 35% of their set objectives. Of course, we need to benefit from and include, new solutions that will come on that trajectory. And that is really where we are. So a lot more is needed. And to your question, what more should we do? Well, personally, I really think that the global adoption of an aerial and maritime carbon framework agreement, which you may know has been delayed by 1 year recently, that will naturally accelerate adoption of cost-effective and sustainable practices. Because I think, the efficiencies that we see today, as long as people are not obliged to pay for it because of high weight or overprotection or, that is actually not really driving the change. So I really believe that the framework will be the incentive. If you see how much actually a ton of carbon will cost with that will be a big driver. And whenever you look at the shipment from, let's say, Europe to US, it's really in the scale from on a pallet shipper position, going from a blanket to very heavy container, you talk a difference from, let's say, 3 to 4 tons of CO2 to 18. Wow. So, in the discussion active to passive, for example, you will see that cost carbon framework should probably be a big enabler. And finally, I think also it's really important in this entire debate around waste and carbon. It is not only waste or only carbon, and it's not only those two. I think there's really more voices saying that we should, with whatever improvement we do, actually challenge ourselves to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Yeah, because it cannot be that we, let's say, don't serve any regions, geographies because they are too hot or they are, So it's really important we look at it holistically, and it is not only waste and not only carbon.
Yeah, no, I think it's a big challenge that we're all going to face in the packaging world for the next few years in terms of figuring out those calculations for sure. Exam packaging positions yourself around being a sort of climate adaptive, trade lane specific solution. And around climate, how fast is climate change actually shifting the goalpost for thermal performance? And have you seen it become more challenging around the packaging that you're putting out into the market over the last few years?
So I would say yes and no. So clearly there are more extremes in temperature in destinations which become hotter, right? At the same time, my belief is that should not drive everything to a higher level of protection. So I'm not a believer in one fits all. I'm not a believer in costly, over-engineered and heavyweight packaging solutions. So I see modularity as an essential point, which is indeed embedded in our approach as a simple and scalable way to adjust to the thermal protection needs. I think we really need to scale to the needs and not have the one fits all. And by doing so, I think cost, weight, and waste can significantly be reduced versus the current practices. Now, to support the change from active to passive, or even within passive to be more granular, let's say, lane risk assessments help in making this responsible thermal protection selection versus thermal challenge choices. The data and the knowledge there is essential, so we can take those efficiency gains, but so they don't come at the expense of integrity. Huh?
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Just onto cell and gene therapy, I did want to touch on this because CGT has been called the most demanding supply chain challenge ever, and I might actually agree with it. It's patient specific, it's ultra cold, it's very small batches, and often it's very time critical. What makes it fundamentally different from a packaging perspective, and how have you found it in terms of shipping in that space?
Okay, so first of all, as a packaging engineer, I've never liked the group name CGT, cell gene therapy, because for me it encompasses such a broad diversity of medicinal products, and their production and distribution is very different from each other. So are the challenges. So for me, the overarching point here is that all of these therapies, they are at the beginning of their scientific iteration, both on manufacturing and distribution actually, and manufacturing distribution have not yet went through optimization. Yeah? Because here, I think the driver for all of these therapies is a first therapy to patient. There's many patients without therapy, so we can be glad the molecules get to market, but clearly, scientifically, they will involve still a lot. Yeah? So today, the implication of that is that the thermal protection mostly needs indeed to be able to take ultra low temperature. The supply chain should be ultra fast, and are the small volume aspect indeed for 2/3 of the approved therapies, they are small volume and patient specific. Now, at the same time, I really believe that in the next decade that will fundamentally change because of scientific evolution, that we will see less stringent cold chain. By the way, you could classify RNA, as we have seen during COVID, as a gene therapy. You have seen how much that evolved, right, through formulation development, etc., right, less stringent cold chain need, but also larger volume. So what you see today is indeed mostly autologous therapies, so they are patient specific, but there is clearly a trend toward allogeneic therapies, allogeneic cell therapies. But finally, the most exciting, I believe, is that the therapy itself is actually also moving more from cell to gene, right? And you know about a cell, and transporting a cell, it requires liquid nitrogen, it's really tough, right? While genes, they are more stable. So I see such a big amount of evolution. So yes, today it is fundamentally different and challenges a lot the packaging protection itself. But I think in the next decades, it will actually normalize to bigger volumes, more regular known molecules, etc. So I think there will be a big shift.
Right. Okay, interesting. A third of CGT, and I'm sorry to use the term, still hit temperature issues in transit. And how much of that do you think is a packaging problem versus handling? And I think it's not just obviously, I think this is a general cold chain question in terms of, in your experience, how much is it a packaging problem versus a handling problem when you have an excursion?
Yeah, indeed. Thanks to reframe to the larger scene, because I don't have a CGT look specifically on this, but I mean, I think it's both. Yeah. So, but at the same time, sometimes there are solutions, but which are not really looked for. Let me look at viral vectors and nucleotides, for example. Yeah, they typically rely on dry ice, okay, so cold, and still you would see a lot of re-icing in the industry, just as generally accepted. Yeah, that's how we do, right? While it could be technically avoidable by taking a more adequate high performance packaging, right? So even if there's a packaging choice, still there is a choice to allow the human intervention to be a must, right? And that I think is a bit dangerous, because you could just avoid to do so, right? And then for the handling aspects, of course, when you look at cell therapy and their cryocoolers, well, there is technically unavoidable. You should do and use that. And there I believe that for sure there's a need for specialty logistic providers to handle it correctly. So I think there are really good packaging solutions. Then is still the question, are they implemented, yes or no? And then the handling aspect is still the case. But what I cannot see and agree and accept is that still you see that there are handlings which are necessary while they could be technically avoidable. That's a bit risky.
Yeah. Okay. I know that on LinkedIn, you've sort of hinted that the future of sub-zero pallet shippers won't be metal. They won't be metal shippers. What does the next generation of sort of shippers look like, do you think, in that space? And where do you think the industry is going in terms of technology?
Yeah, when launching our innovations, we take a rather challenging approach toward pharma shippers, airlines, and forwarders to rethink the thermal protection used in cold chain logistics. And of course, it is ongoing. Generally speaking, there is a trend from active to passive. And yeah, our view is that a proactive twist here can help challenge the status quo and push the change forward. Now, specifically on sub-zero innovation that you refer to, yes, we now have a lightweight pallet shipper solution, which benefits from that combination of monoblock and advanced insulation, 2-in-1. So basically we mold all together in one enclosed molding, let's say. And this indeed is actually a first off, which actually brings an alternative to heavyweight containers for the range of -80 to -20. And yes, that can actually alleviate some of the issues seen in the market because of high lease rates or high airline surcharges due to weight and overall container availability. So this is actually, I think, a general statement that I think you should also see for your business, that yes, of course, I really am a strong believer in passive packaging. At the same time, this is not a discussion of will the future be active or passive? Of course, there will also be trade lanes, well-balanced, high volumes, etc., which could be active. We just need all of the solution. But the fact that there was today not yet a solution for sub-zero temperature down to -80 in a pallet shipper format, in a lightweight format, well, that is actually a gap we solved here.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, very good. If we talk around just the industry dynamic and the customers for a little bit, I mean, I understand obviously, and you will sort of serve pharma, biotech, CROs, 3PLs, humanitarian organizations. You're going to have a wide range of customers that you're obviously helping on a weekly, monthly basis. And who's pushing hardest for innovation right now? And in what direction is the customer base pushing for innovation? Where do they want to see improvements?
Well, I guess it depends what problems you're trying to solve with the innovation, right? Particularly what I see upcoming more and more is end-to-end or door-to-door challenges, in which I believe freight forwarders have a very interesting position into the market because they have the oversight of those operations. And so they should be knowing, where the challenges are, where the risks are. And I believe that for them in their position, in a market with lots of competition, the innovation really defines their future, but also our future as packaging companies. And I've seen actually freight forwarders taking a good reputation to advise and to lead actually in continuous improvement topics towards pharma shippers. So I guess, they bring interesting concepts to life, new concepts. I'm thinking about the cold chain corridors, for example, and they bring that to pharma shippers. And the pharma shippers themselves, of course, will support that and drive that change and ask the market. But so interestingly, I also see really a growing role for freight forwarders. Of course, it is still the case that pharma shippers directly come to you and they have unmet needs, like unmet performance needs, or they may have needs, especially in CRO, but also in pharma shippers, for design for reusability. This, of course, will get straight to your table because it's very narrow and packaging. But I also believe like the bigger picture end to end, that is a space where innovation is happening and freight forwarders take a leading role.
Yeah. Okay. I think we both agree on the same thing, that really taking a lane by lane approach with packaging and having lanes with packaging that isn't over-engineered for its requirement is really important. I mean, where there's probably a lot of work to do with the industry. One of the things that we've seen is obviously qualification and validation is time consuming. It does take a long time in our market to get new products into a customer. How much effect do you think that's having long term in terms of the qualification piece versus actually getting new technology into a customer supply chain? And do you think there's a way that it could be improved or sped up in your experience?
It clearly is a block today. And so that is something we need to address. Now, at the same time, I'm not questioning the need for qualification or validation in the pharmaceutical ecosystem. But clearly what there's a lack of standardization, which could contribute to better comparability, acceptance, and leveraging, let's say, supplier data. Actually, we need that common agreement. We need that framework, which will accelerate change and reduce non-value added work. Personally, I've seen this happen in the bioprocessing space, where each vendor had its own protocol on data for extractable leachables of their components, which were in product contact with the drug. And this was, of course, key for patient safety calculations, considerations whenever a new technology was that. And interestingly, it's the pharma shippers, pharma companies themselves, actually, which in 2014 reunited under the Bioform Operations Group. And they suggested a framework for standardized testing, covering most of the application conditions. So 80% approximately of biologics manufacturing. And that enabled fast and efficient risk verification. And I must say, all of the vendors aligned to that. I've seen this week, actually, a similar dynamic appearing within the healthcare logistics under the initiative of Pharma.io with their packaging qualification integration PQI project. And this clearly is somewhat the same, right? It should boost a more efficient way of collaboration on packaging qualification. And I believe, Thomas, it should also embed beyond the historic ISTA 7D type profiles. It should also consider what you also mentioned, like cold chain corridor like situations. So we could also have profiles which we all agree on could be representative and all characterized in the same way. This will greatly help the industry to implement new, more efficient solutions.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with the amount of information and data the industry has at its disposal now, and AI with analytics, etc., I think hopefully we're moving into an area for everyone where it's simpler and easier to validate packaging into certain lanes, and it would be good for both sides, I think.
Absolutely.
Just on the sustainability and regulations, EU packaging regulations have tightened pretty quickly over the last 4 or 5 years. And in your opinion, is pharma cold chain packaging ahead or behind where it needs to be on sustainability, and where do you think the gaps are?
Yeah, so the packaging waste regulation is indeed part of the EU Green Deal decisions, and more specifically, this PPWR is one of the key measures under that, and with the aim to bring more circularity into business, let's say. And for pharmaceutical cold chain, it applies too. But the reassuring part is that product protection and safety is essential, right? So yes, we want to go circular, but we need to ensure that the product protection is secured. So I believe what I've seen in the pharmaceutical cold chain packaging space, Thomas, is there has been innovation into single-use, recyclable or compostable on one hand, or reusable through reverse logistics. Now, as I look at this, I do observe that both of these solutions are relatively limited in their circular potential, if you want, right? Because you still talk about one way, one utilization, and are limited multi-use cycles. And we all know reverse is like 3 to 10 times, something like that. So I think that it's still lacking other solutions. And this is where we come back to what we said earlier. Okay, we add to the toolbox the eco-freighter solution, this cross-industry aspect of shippers that at destination can offer other value. I think we need more of this kind of solutions as well, because I think we cannot only focus on waste. We need to approach again the broader sustainability objectives. And so packaging waste regulation should not be the only one you look at. No, it's really about broader sustainability metrics. And so I think really it invites our industry to go even beyond, Thomas.
Yeah. Okay. And you're on the Fly Pharma steering group committee, and is that relationship between packaging design and air freight efficiency talked about enough? And what are the main conversations and things that committee are driving at the moment in terms of the conversations you're having?
Yeah, clearly it was not. There was not sufficient talk between packaging and air freight efficiency. I think historically the container suppliers, they were closer to them, but today there's clearly a need for us to talk closer to them. And I've been able indeed in that network to approach them with some specific examples how packaging can influence the air freight efficiency in showing the impact of thermal protection to bring weight reduction and so carbon reduction, or maybe optimizing aircraft PMC loading efficiencies from 4 to 5 pallet shippers. This you also have with blankets, of course, you have 5. Or maybe reducing the usage of dry ice because they have some limitations on their aircraft. And if we can be more efficient, they can load more. So all of these points really help to create a culture of sharing, collaboration with the airlines. So that's really interesting. And on the opposite side of that, for us as a packaging company, it's so important to be engaged with them because they allow us to understand better, hey, what is an aircraft parameter? What are the uncontrolled events on a trip? And what are the future evolutions so we can prepare better for our future offering?
Yeah. Okay, nice. I know we're running sort of slightly out of time here, but you're a leader in the space. You're running a business in the area. How do we attract more talent into the sector, do you think, over the next couple of years? Do you think there's a talent gap at all in terms of the sort of hires that you're trying to make inside your business?
Yeah, I think, we should have together a stronger vision. I think the fact that sustainability, for example, the last 2 years has lost some traction, I think that's a pity. I think still, we want to save lives in a sustainable way. That should be a strong message we put out to attract those people, and also to explain that supply chain is not a behind the scenes role. We can be proud of what we do, and then also I think it needs to be combined with. We see a lot of learning academies and places where you can exchange knowledge, learn faster, and also on digital skills. This should also be like the offering we bring to those people to say, hey, we still have a long journey. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening, and you will be learning here, all of these digital skills, which will bring you forward. So it should be, it should be a learn from experience for them as well, and should have a strong vision.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You've been in the leading exam packaging now for a year or so. If we sit down in 2 or 3 years' time, where do you want the business to have got to? And where do you think you want your innovations to have evolved to in terms of the packaging designs that you're working on?
Yeah, I think, really moving forward into the ESG space with the alternative models as we discussed, that is clearly something that on a global scale deserves to be fully considered. That's one point. And then I guess, many side innovations from others, which will make our solutions more proactive, intelligent, digitally connected. I believe, we must be agnostic to all of these tools, and they should be embedded. And also, our inclusion of our solutions into lane risk assessments and more simulations, as you alluded to earlier. I think that's a bit where I hope, to see everything moving, because all of it will really increase the trust factor into thermal protection and will avoid, of course, still the known excursions we have in the market and remove those risks with better information, let's say. Yeah?
Okay. And the last question is, what's one conversation the cold chain industry should have, but really isn't talking about enough?
Yeah, I think it's generally anything to do with the risk levels. Yeah, we hear about everyone is controlling everything perfectly, but I think we need to be transparent, and this is where lane risk assessments will really help us. Yeah, to really understand what is exactly the aircraft capability, what is exactly the tarmac hold time, what is exactly this and that. So this will overall, help to improve quality. So I think visibility, transparency, that of course will greatly help. Then also for us, Thomas, to innovate on the total cost of ownership. Yeah, if we have an idea of all of these costs, we know that we potentially with a premium packaging can remove, I don't know, thousands of euros of cost somewhere. That is actually what probably will help us all forward. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Christophe, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Brilliant conversation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. If people want to get a hold of you or get a hold of people or the sales team of your business, what's the best way of doing that? And are you at any events over the next 6 to 12 months that people can come and see the products at?
Yeah, so I would say to reach out to me, it's my name, Christophe.Pierlot@exampackaging.com. I will be, I'm quite into air pharma communities. So Brussels is the first one in June. Frankfurt, there's a Pharma Day. Frankfurt also have an air cargo conference in September. And then Fly Pharma is into the air cargo community of Denmark. So I really like the community aspect of getting together and so to learn from each other. These are the best places to exchange.
Perfect. Good. All right. Well, thank you for coming on, and really appreciate you taking the time. You've been listening to Cold Chain Insights. My name's Thomas Hunt, and please tune in next week for our next guest, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.